Zarelle Vintara was born into privilege, groomed for perfection, and admired by everyone, until jealousy turned her into a killer. Reeva Clyne was her classmate, her rival, and eventually, her victim. What began as silent envy in the school hallways ended in a brutal murder that shocked the entire nation. This is the twisted story of how one entitled teen's obsession with control destroyed two lives, and how she realized too late that her own life was already over. Zarelle Vintara had the kind of life most teenagers could only dream of. She lived in a sprawling white mansion on the hilltops of Elmsfield, a quiet but wealthy town where families prided themselves on legacy and prestige. Zarelle was the only child of Garin and Alicia Vintara, a tech mogul and a luxury interior designer. Money was never an issue. She had designer clothes flown in from Europe, a personal driver, and even her own customized SUV before she was legally allowed to drive. Her bedroom looked like a hotel suite. At school, she walked the halls with confidence, always surrounded by a small group of admirers who craved her attention, even though she rarely gave it sincerely. Teachers praised her when she turned in assignments, even if they were incomplete. Rules bent around her. Principal meetings ended with apologies, not consequences. She was used to being the exception. Zarelle didn't see herself as a student. She saw herself as someone destined for fame, someone too extraordinary for the mundane lives of her peers. She called herself a born leader, though she never truly led anything. Her reputation was built on image, not action. Among all the students, only one person quietly rivaled Zarelle's spotlight, Reeva Clyne. Reeva was everything Zarelle wasn't, but wanted to be deep down. She was calm, humble, naturally intelligent, and respected. She didn't wear expensive labels, nor did she chase popularity. But people gravitated toward her. Teachers appreciated her focus. Classmates admired her kindness. She earned every accolade on merit, not status. That made Zarelle feel invisible. At first, Zarelle pretended not to care. She laughed it off when Reeva received academic awards or got selected for student panels. But a bitterness began to grow. She started whispering rumors about Reeva. Nothing. Too bold. Just enough to plant doubt. She told a classmate that Reeva used tutors, claimed Reeva's essays weren't her own. None of it stuck. Reeva remained untouchable. Zarelle's resentment became personal when she was overlooked for a scholarship she expected to win. The selection committee chose Reeva. That moment shattered Zarelle's illusion of invincibility. Her parents barely noticed her disappointment, too consumed by their careers and upcoming charity galas. To them, Zarelle was just another detail in their carefully curated public image. She smiled for the cameras, but inside, she was spiraling. She began staying up late, scrolling through Reeva's social media. Every smiling photo, every comment praising her, felt like a slap. Zarelle started keeping a private journal, not filled with her thoughts, but with obsessive notes about Reeva. Her schedule, her routines, even the path she took to school. She told herself it was harmless. Just research. But it wasn't. It was a blueprint. The turning point came one rainy afternoon when Zarelle overheard Reeva being praised by a teacher in the hallway. Something in her snapped. She felt invisible, in that moment, like she didn't exist. Her mind raced. She wasn't going to be second to anyone. Not in her school, not in her town. Not ever. That night, Zarelle sat alone in her room, staring at herself in the mirror. She imagined what the world would look like without Reeva Clyne. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't a plan yet, but it was. Something more dangerous. A feeling. A desire. The next morning, she walked into school with her usual poise. She laughed, she posed for photos, and she complimented teachers she usually ignored. But deep within, something had changed. Something dark had taken root. something that wouldn't be satisfied with just being noticed. She no longer wanted to shine. She wanted to be the only one shining. And in her mind, there was only one way to make that happen. Reeva Clyne didn't come to school on Monday. At first, no one thought much of it. Students missed school all the time. Flu season had arrived, and the weather in Elmsfield had turned bitterly cold. But by the afternoon, murmurs started traveling through the halls. Reeva hadn't messaged anyone. Her phone wasn't responding. Teachers began to notice the silence too. She wasn't the kind to miss a day without informing someone. By evening, Reeva's parents reported her missing. The police responded quickly. The Clynes were well known in the town, and Reeva had no history of running away or behavioral problems. Her absence was completely out of character. Investigators arrived at the Clyne residence and found Reeva's room neat and undisturbed. Her school bag and laptop were missing, indicating she had intended to go to school. But she never made it. The first clue came from a neighbor's doorbell camera. At around 6:45 a.m. on Friday, the day Reeva disappeared, it showed her stepping out of her front gate, dressed in her school uniform, holding her backpack. But instead of heading toward the bus stop like she always did, she walked a block down and got into a white SUV parked near the corner. The footage was grainy, but the make and model were clear. It was a luxury vehicle, rare in town, sleek, white, and spotless. Detectives canvassed the area, looking for more footage. A nearby gas station had a better angle. It captured the SUV, leaving town, heading north toward the rural outskirts. Then nothing. No more footage. No return trip recorded. Whoever was driving hadn't come back on the same route. Police began identifying owners of similar vehicles in the area. The search didn't take long. Only a handful of people owned that particular make and model, and one of them was Zarelle Vintara, Zarelle's father. Officers went to the Vintara estate the next day. Zarelle claimed the vehicle hadn't been used in days, and Zarelle backed him up. She said she'd been home the entire evening studying, and the car hadn't left the driveway. But the SUV told a different story. Its tires were still lightly coated with dried mud. The interior smelled faintly of bleach, and when investigators looked closer, they noticed something off. The rear floor mats were missing. Zarelle appeared agitated, but he cooperated. The SUV was taken in for forensic analysis. In the meantime, police began speaking to students and teachers at the school. Zarelle insisted she hadn't spoken to Reeva in weeks. She described their relationship as distant and indifferent. But that wasn't the truth. One student came forward quietly. He said he'd seen Reeva and Zarelle talking behind the gym just a few days before she vanished. They weren't arguing, but it didn't look like a friendly chat either. Their conversation had been hushed, tense. When he asked Reeva about it later, she brushed it off, saying it was about a class project. Investigators became more suspicious of Zarelle. Her social media was wiped clean, almost too clean. No pictures with Reeva, no recent activity, barely any posts at all. It looked curated, purposeful. A search warrant for her personal computer was granted. Her search history revealed concerning things, questions about phone tracking, bleach cleanup methods, and even how long bodies took to decompose in cold weather. That was enough to escalate the investigation. Days passed with no sign of Reeva. No phone activity, no bank card use, no sightings. Flyers were posted around town. Vigils were held at school. But behind the scenes, pressure was mounting. Forensics from the SUV came back, blood traces beneath the carpet. It was faint, but present. DNA testing began. Then, a janitor at Elmsfield High discovered something disturbing in the girls' locker room. A gold chain caught in a floor drain. It was engraved with the initials RC. Reeva's parents confirmed it was hers. Zarelle had no explanation when asked. Her confidence started to crack. Reeva wasn't just missing anymore. Something terrible had happened. and the girl who claimed to know nothing was now the center of everything. The pressure on the investigation intensified as forensic teams worked around the clock. Reeva Clyne's blood had been found in the Vintara SUV, and the necklace in the locker room only added to the suspicion. Still, without a body, detectives needed more to bring charges. They began piecing together a timeline, analyzing every movement made by Zarelle Vintara in the days leading up to and following Reeva's disappearance. What they found was a trail of carefully hidden lies, slowly unraveling. Zarelle's internet. Activity revealed that she had visited remote property listings in the Elmsfield outskirts weeks before Reeva vanished. She had scrolled through abandoned greenhouses, derelict barns, and isolated cabins, places far from public roads, places no one would look twice at. One particular location stood out: an abandoned greenhouse on land once used for herbal farming, now overgrown and forgotten. It hadn't been used in years, and there was no security or fencing. It was only accessible by a narrow, muddy trail off a service road. No cameras, no lights. While investigators followed this lead, more forensic results came back. Beneath the bleach-cleaned surface of the SUV's trunk, a long blonde hair was found stuck in the lining. It matched Reeva's DNA. The cleaning had been thorough, but not perfect. Investigators also found traces of soil from the tire treads. The sample matched the rare mineral composition of soil found in the northern outskirts, close to the greenhouse property Zarelle had researched. Detectives obtained a warrant and visited the site with cadaver dogs. The structure was in ruins: glass, shattered, weeds growing between the tiles, wooden panels rotting under the weight of time. In the farthest corner of the property, near a broken water tank, one of the dogs signaled. Officers began digging. After hours of careful excavation, they found disturbed soil. Just beneath the surface, wrapped in a thin plastic tarp, was a lifeless body. The identification didn't take long. Dental records confirmed it was Reeva Clyne. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the back of the head. A small metal object, trophy, was found next to her. It was smeared with dried blood, and the engraving was still visible. Zarelle Vintara, Academic Excellence Award. News spread through Elmsfield like wildfire. The local high school fell into a state of silent mourning. Teachers canceled lessons. Students gathered in shocked silence near Reeva's memorial. But the most shocking moment came the following day, when Zarelle was arrested during her literature class. The principal's voice called her name over the intercom, asking her to report to the office. As she walked through the hallway, 2 plainclothes officers were waiting. She was handcuffed in front of stunned classmates who watched, frozen in disbelief. At the station, Zarelle's attitude changed rapidly. Gone was the entitled smirk, replaced by a cold, defensive silence. She refused to speak at first, but investigators weren't in a hurry. They had the car. They had the search history. They had the body. And now, they had the murder weapon. In her room, investigators found a journal with pages filled in red ink. It wasn't a diary, but a stream of consciousness, a twisted record of thoughts. Some entries described feelings of invisibility, rage, and the desire to make someone disappear. One line stood out among the rest. "If she's gone, maybe the world will finally look at me again." Zarelle's fingerprints were also on the trophy. The rope found with Reeva's body matched strands of cord from Zarelle's garage. Piece by piece, the puzzle was complete. What had started as silent envy had spiraled into calculated violence. No one in Elmsfield could believe it. A teenager with wealth, status, and everything handed to her had destroyed it all, for nothing more than recognition. And now, with the truth laid bare, the mask Zarelle wore for so long was finally gone. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Zarelle Vintara's trial. News crews lined the steps outside, broadcasting every update as the story of the entitled teenager-turned-killer gripped the nation. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The prosecution had built a devastating case, piece by piece, with a chilling level of evidence that left little room for doubt. The murder of Reeva Clyne had become more than just a local tragedy. It was a national conversation about privilege, envy, and unchecked entitlement. Zarelle appeared composed as she entered the courtroom, dressed in a modest gray outfit that sharply contrasted with the flashy designer wardrobe she once flaunted on social media. Her long hair was tied back, and her eyes rarely met anyone else's. But the arrogance hadn't fully left her. She walked like someone who believed she still had control, that she might yet rewrite the narrative. Her legal team pleaded not guilty. They claimed Zarelle was being targeted unfairly, that the investigation had been biased from the beginning, and that circumstantial evidence was being twisted to fit a false story. But the evidence spoke louder than any defense. Forensic specialists testified about the blood traces in the SUV, the bleach-soaked floor, the hair strand, and the dirt that matched the greenhouse location. The trophy engraved with Zarelle's name, found next to Reeva's body, was presented to the jury. Its weight, both literal and symbolic, was impossible to ignore. The most powerful moment came when Reeva's parents took the stand. They described a daughter who had never caused a day of worry in her life, a girl who dreamed of studying environmental science, who volunteered at animal shelters on weekends, who stayed up late to tutor struggling classmates, sometimes even Zarelle in the early years of their friendship. Their pain was raw and unfiltered. The courtroom fell silent as Reeva's mother described waiting by the door every night, hoping her daughter would walk through it again. Zarelle showed no emotion during their testimony. No tears, no visible regret. She looked straight ahead, stone-faced, as if it were happening to someone else. Then came the journal. Each page was projected for the court to see, entries full of toxic self-pity, resentment, and twisted justification. The jury read lines like, "The world doesn't reward quiet monsters, it only fears loud ones," and "If I can't be her, I'll erase her." The prosecution used the journal not just as evidence of motive, but as a window into Zarelle's unraveling mind. She wasn't mentally unstable, they argued. She was aware, calculated, and fully capable of choosing another path, but she didn't. The defense tried to push back. They claimed the journal was the private expression of a disturbed teenager who never meant harm. They painted Zarelle as a troubled young woman, pressured by her family's high expectations and consumed by a mental health crisis. But the argument fell flat. The crime had been too methodical, the cover-up too deliberate. When the time came for the verdict, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Zarelle stood motionless as the judge read the sentence. 42 years in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no outburst, no plea, no tears. Just a blank stare into the distance. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was the realization that this time, there was no one left to blame. The wife's courtroom emptied slowly. Reeva's family embraced, their grief still heavy but tempered with a fragment of justice. Zarelle was led away in cuffs, the cameras capturing her final moment as a free person. Back in Elmsfield, the school she once ruled over removed her name from honor boards and awards. Her legacy was now only a shadow. No one wore her signature, fashion. No one mimicked her walk. The girl who once believed the world revolved around her had disappeared into a prison uniform, locked away in a place where her name meant nothing. And for the first time in her life, Zarelle Vintara was truly invisible. Zarelle Vintara entered the prison gates with the same cold expression she had worn throughout the trial. The concrete walls, the sterile corridors, the stripped-down cell, all were stark contrasts to the lavish life she had once known. Gone were the silks, the tailored outfits, and the endless praise. Now she wore the same ill-fitting uniform as every other inmate. Her name was reduced to a number. Her reputation meant nothing, and her future had vanished the moment the verdict was read. The other inmates were aware of who she was. Many had seen her face on the news. Some watched the trial with interest, others with indifference. But no one cared about her past privileges. In prison, the currency was respect, not status. And respect was something Zarelle had never truly earned. At first, she tried to carry herself with the same silent superiority she had mastered outside. She avoided conversation, walked with her head high, and looked down on those around her. But that didn't last long. In prison, such behavior was a provocation. She learned quickly that silence was not strength here. It was a weakness. She became a target for minor harassment. Missing items from her tray. Sharp whispers in the showers. A shoved shoulder in the hallway. She never fought back, only retreated further into herself. The staff kept a close eye on her. She was placed in a rehabilitation program for young offenders despite her age, meant to provide structure, education, and psychological evaluation. During mandatory sessions, she rarely spoke. When pressed about her crime, she offered vague answers. No remorse, no reflection. It was as if the full weight of what she had done still hadn't reached her. Her assigned counselor noted her emotional detachment in every report. But inside, cracks were beginning to show. At night, she lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant clatter of keys and the low murmur of voices beyond her cell door. Time felt warped. The days blurred into each other, each one colder, quieter, and emptier than the last. Letters from her parents stopped coming. Her former friends never wrote. Social media had erased her existence. She had become a ghost outside those walls, remembered only in whispers, documentaries, and a string of angry internet threads. Then came the one-year anniversary of Reeva Clyne's death. News stations revisited the case. Former classmates gave interviews. Teachers described how the school had changed, how trust had been broken, how students now walked the halls with more caution, more silence. A mural of Reeva was unveiled in the school courtyard, painted by her art club peers. Bright, beautiful, and surrounded by quotes from her journals. The ceremony was televised. In her cell, Zarelle watched the report on the common room television. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. But she didn't sleep that night either. Months passed. Her behavior became more withdrawn. She stopped eating regularly. She no longer participated in group activities. A psychological review declared her to be in a state of emotional shutdown. Still, she refused to acknowledge guilt. When asked why she did it, she gave the same answer every time. I don't know. But the truth was, she did know. She had destroyed a life out of envy. She had buried a classmate in a shallow grave because she couldn't stand being ordinary. Now, surrounded by concrete and barbed wire, Zarelle Vintara faced the only thing she couldn't manipulate: consequences. There would be no second chance. No redemption arc. Just silence. She wasn't feared. She wasn't admired. She wasn't even remembered by name in many of the newer inmates' conversations. To them, she was just another prisoner, another number, another story that faded with time. And that, in the end, was her punishment. Not just the walls, not just the years, but the slow, suffocating realization that she would never matter again.